Steve Clemens. I direct the American Strategy Program here at the New America Foundation. I also need to mention that I blog at the Washington Note.com because on the Washington Note running live, we have this event for those who run. I was just told by our technology person that we have about 500 people watching online, and also PamsHouseBlend.com, Florida Progressive Coalition blog. They're streaming this live too, as well as the New America Foundation. I want to recognize former Congressman Dave McCurdy, who's here with us today, former Congressman Jim Colby. Jim, wave. You know, and it's great to have you both here with us for an event that I'm very, very pleased to be doing. Those who, I was just pleased that the Director of Communications of the Democratic National Committee just sent to me the final platform, which is going to go to the convention, and it's now available as a PDF at the Washington Note. I'm not going to spend much time introducing our folks. They are a very, very distinguished panel, and but I do want to say a few words. First, I want to say a very special thanks to former Assistant Secretary of State Susan Rice, who is Barack Obama's Senior Foreign Policy Advisor on leave from Brookings. Susan is with us here. She's going to be with us for a portion of the program because after her part, she's running off. To her right, we have the principal author of the Democratic Policy Platform, a New America Foundation alum who was the founder of our Work and Family program here some time ago. She is on leave as serving as the policy director in Senator Obama's Senate office. And I've asked two very good friends to share comments. Steve Call, the president of the New America Foundation, who many people know as a Pulitzer Prize-winning journalist and a staff writer for the New Yorker magazine, which he continues. He's also launching his own blog soon with the New Yorker, I'm happy to say. We're all getting into blogging. And then to the right, and his right, Maya McGinnis, a great friend here, another colleague at the New America Foundation, president of the Committee for a Responsible Federal Budget, as well as the director of the Fiscal Policy Program here at New America. We have, I'm not going to say anything more about the platform because it's something we all should chew on. I have to say what I did write in my own survey of this about a week ago is that it was terrific to see, one, how well, I didn't know at the time that Karen Kornblue had written it. And I know a lot of people wrote it. There were other people, but it's sort of poetic at the beginning, and it sort of opens in terms of a narrative. If you were to imagine, you know, what sort of a nexus between Obamaism and the aspirations of a country might read like, particularly one, I'm sort of sick to some degree of always thinking about wars here and there, wars yet to come, that it was nice to see that we talked about a different set of issues on the front end of this. But we'll hear more about that later as we discuss and chew on this. But without further ado, let me invite Karen Kornblue to speak for just 1 or 2 minutes, and then I'm going to have Susan explicate the parts of the foreign policy aspects of the platform that she'd like to touch on. We'll handle that, and then we'll come back for Karen to talk about the domestic and economic dimensions of platform. So without further ado, please give a round of applause to my former colleague, Karen Kornblue.
Have to adjust the mic way down. Thanks so much, New America, and Steve and Maya. The fact that Steve Clemens was able to pull this off in a day is a testament to what an amazing force of nature he is, and what a critical role he plays in terms of opening up policy debates and bringing in new voices and new perspectives. So thank you so much, Steve. The reason that the platform was just released minutes ago is there was a fire drill at the DNC this morning. And it was just such a metaphor for this journey that we've been on. Usually there are 5 months to write a platform, and this year there were 5 weeks. And on top of that, we only had 1 week in between. There's a drafting committee that meets. It's about 20 people that met in Cleveland this year, and then there's a full platform committee that meets in Pittsburgh with 186 folks. There was only a week in between. Usually there's 2 weeks. On top of that, I don't know if you noticed, but Barack Obama had a small trip to the Middle East and Europe, which our foreign policy team was planning and implementing in the middle of all this. And then what I was warned about when I came over to the DNC just over a month ago was that the platform committee itself was almost evenly divided between supporters of Hillary Clinton and supporters of Obama because of how the primaries had worked out and how the state parties divide up their representatives on the different credentials committee, rules committee, and platform committee. So what I was warned about is that you really don't want to have a minority report where somebody is really dissatisfied and wants to send something to the convention. I don't know if you all know this, but when Ted Kennedy spoke at the 1980 convention, that was on a minority report on the platform. But this process, despite all that, went so smoothly, and there was so much unity. There was actually, in Pittsburgh, there was never a vote that was contested. You know, we all worked everything out. We worked together with incredible goodwill, and everyone was sort of blown away by how smooth it went and how much goodwill people brought. And you know, no matter what you read in the press, this was an incredible. This was a testament to how unified the Democratic Party is, and how people came together to work together. So it was really fantastic experience. And I think the document itself shows you that unified voice, that unified approach. Democrats, I think, share a real vision, and that comes through in the platform of a diagnosis of the problem that America faces right now and what kind of direction we need to go in the future. And the document also, I think, conveys a sense of urgency, that we can't just continue to live with Washington the way it's been. And so what the document tries to do is not flinch from really naming what's going on in Washington right now and why Americans are frustrated and actually held back by their government in many ways. That we really are used to as a country being able to come together and in very common sense ways solving problems, and that's what we've done at our proudest moments, whether it was, you know, ending slavery or building a transcontinental railroad or electrifying rural America, you know, building an arsenal of democracy in World War II. We've come together, we've taken on big challenges, we've tackled them, and we've solved them. And in countries around the world, you see people solving problems that seem to completely stymie us, whether it's broadband or renewable energy. People seem to be able to handle these problems that seem to be too much for us. And so the document really tries to say what's going on and what do we need to do, and lay out a very positive message of what Democrats stand for, what America has stood for, and how we need to renew all that. So it's broken, the document itself is called Renewing America's Promise. It's broken into 4 sections. The first section is called Renewing the American Dream, and it's about the economy. The second section that Susan will talk about is called Renewing America's Leadership. The third section is Renewing American Community, and the fourth section is Renewing American Democracy. And the last 2 are really about, well, how are we going to bring this change about? You know, the first 2 really say, what are the policy changes we need to make? And the last 2 are really an answer to Barack Obama's comment that we can't keep doing things the same way and expect different results. We really have to renew our sense of community, and we all need to act differently in our own lives and at a community level, and then also we need to change the way we do things as a country. So I'll turn it over to Susan in a second. I just want to say that the best part of this whole experience was the people that I got to meet and go drinking with. It's starting with the head of the drafting committee is Governor Janet Napolitano of Arizona, and if those of you who have not followed her, she is absolutely what you would want in a leader. She was incredible at moving the process along, and I think the fact that it went so smoothly and there was so much unity was really a testament to her, but she was also unerring in her sense of what was important and what mattered. She was really incredible. Governor Deval Patrick led the overall platform committee along with Patricia Madrid, former Attorney General of New Mexico, and Judith McHale, former CEO of Discovery Communications. And Deval Patrick especially, and Eleanor Holmes Norton, excuse me, that's right, she was a also, and okay, and I'm hurrying up, Steve. So anyway, Deval Patrick was just one of the key roles that he played, I thought, was imbuing this document with a really positive message and this vision of what Democrats stand for that you'll see throughout the document. So, and then Susan Rice, who has already been introduced, but I'm sure you all know that she and Tony Lake put together the team of foreign policy advisors to Barack Obama, and she's a good friend, but it was also amazing to watch her put together this jewel of a section on foreign policy while she was also planning and traveling with Barack Obama on his trip. So it's great that she can be here to talk about it. Thank you.
Susan Rice.
Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for being with us. Let me begin by thanking Steve and Maya for participating. You're good to bring us together on short notice, and we very much appreciate it. And I want to pay a special note of thanks to my friend and colleague, Karen Kornblue. She's extraordinarily modest, but I cannot tell you how much time and effort and diplomacy went into this product, in addition to her impeccable writing skills. And out of it has come something that I think we're all very proud of as a party. And I do want to underscore this theme of unity. It was quite exceptional. I was privileged to serve on the platform drafting committee and then to participate in the actual meeting of the platform committee last weekend in Pittsburgh. The foreign policy section, which I will tell you about, consists of roughly 16 pages, a little less than a third of the entire document. It was adopted by acclamation within 2 minutes. The whole platform committee ended at 3 o'clock, which was a record. And it was a function of the fact that there's a great deal of commonality on the critical challenges we face and the nature of the solutions that are required. We worked extremely well within the platform drafting committee and indeed within the entire platform committee. We were privileged to have very helpful and useful inputs from a broad cross-section of the platform committee. It's a better document as a consequence, and yet at the same time we were able to come to agreement and understanding on literally everything. So as Karen said, there was no element of dissent or contention. The section I'd like to describe to you, as Karen said, is called Renewing America's Leadership. Indeed, the whole theme of the platform and the whole message of Senator Obama's campaign is renewal. It's looking forward. It's about the future and how we can change and adapt to be better than we have ever been in meeting the challenges and opportunities of the future. It's not backward looking. We don't talk about restoration of some status quo ante. That's not achievable and it's not desirable. We've got to meet head on the challenges of the 21st century and the opportunities that they pose, and that's what this section is very much about. It begins by a description of the nature of the world we're living in and underscores that in the 21st century, the threats we face are at least as dangerous and in some ways more complex than those we've confronted in the past. And they range not only from states which can be confrontational to transnational security challenges like terrorism, like weapons of mass destruction, disease that can kill on a massive scale, environmental degradation and climate change. These are the nature of the challenges, and by definition, as the platform says, they require cooperative solutions. They require confronting these threats head-on while working with our allies and coming together in effective partnerships. The platform section on national security and foreign policy outlines a strategy that focuses on 7 goals. And I will tell you in a second what those 7 goals are, but let me just underscore that over the course of the last 20 months, as Senator Obama has campaigned and discussed with the American people how he would change our leadership role in the world, he has laid out in very specific detail across a wide range of foreign policy and national security challenges his specific approaches to these problems. And if you were to do, as I had to do recently, and compile all his speeches and fact sheets and articles and in detail, it's over 150 pages of rich detail. We've now, in fact, in this platform, boiled that down to a substantial extent to 16 pages, where you can really get a good sense of the depth and the breadth of his approach to foreign policy and national security. So this 7-part strategy, or 7 goals, consist of the following. First, ending the war in Iraq responsibly. Secondly, defeating al-Qaeda and combating violent extremism. Thirdly, securing nuclear weapons and materials from terrorists. Fourth, revitalizing and supporting our military, and indeed our veterans. Fifth, renewing our partnerships to promote common security. Sixth, to advance democracy and development. And seventh, to protect our planet by achieving energy security and combating climate change. You will see in this document, as well as in a number of Senator Obama's policy statements, a theme that can be put in shorthand as common security and common humanity. The underlying premise is that our security in the 21st century, given the nature of transnational challenges, is now inextricably linked to the security and well-being of people in various different parts of the world. We share a common security, and we enhance that common security by embracing and investing in our common humanity. This is not rhetoric, this is not woolly thinking. This is about the practical understanding that where there's conflict and poverty and disease and weak states and states that are incapable of taking the sort of responsibility that they must to be real partners in dealing with these transnational challenges, then we are at greater risk. And we are more secure when countries and peoples in different parts of the world are able to provide for their people, provide security, and be responsible international actors. Section 1 on ending the war in Iraq will look familiar to those who have been paying attention to this campaign. It states that we must bring the war in Iraq to a responsible end. It notes that Iraq was a diversion from the fight against the terrorists who struck us on 9/11 and has been incompetently prosecuted war. It states that we will responsibly redeploy our combat forces from Iraq and refocus them on urgent missions. And indeed that we will withdraw our combat brigades at a pace of 1 to 2 brigades per month and expect to complete that redeployment within 16 months. The platform in this section goes on to talk about the need for generous assistance to Iraqi refugees and internally displaced, the importance of diplomacy, and indeed the need for the United States to be engaged both in internally brokering political compromise and reconciliation within Iraq and more actively being engaged in the region and beyond to support progress in Iraq. It states clearly and unequivocally that we seek no permanent bases in Iraq and makes clear that after redeployment there will be a residual presence to perform very specific missions that you've heard Senator Obama articulate on a number of occasions, targeting terrorists, protecting our embassy and civilian personnel, and advising and supporting Iraqi security forces provided the Iraqis make political progress. This is an important piece of leverage. The aim here is to catalyze the progress that the Iraqis seek because they very much want the United States to continue to provide that training and support, and herein we say we will if they do their part. The second section is on defeating al-Qaeda and combating terrorism, and it focuses not only on Afghanistan and Pakistan, but on the larger counterterrorism challenge. It states that, as Admiral Mullen, our chairman of the Joint Chiefs, and others have said, that we lack at present the resources to finish the job in Afghanistan as a consequence of our commitment in Iraq. So here you have a clear statement of priorities. The need to draw down our forces in Iraq, not only to rebuild and reconstitute our overstretched military, but also to have some additional capacity at the same time to engage more in Afghanistan. So he commits to at least two additional combat brigades in Afghanistan, eliciting more troops and less constraints from our NATO partners, and coupling that military commitment with a far stepped-up commitment to economic development, to anti-corruption activities, to poppy eradication and alternative sources of livelihood. This is a comprehensive and multifaceted approach. Steve, how much time do I have?
As much as you want before you rush to the airport.
Okay, so if I'm talking too fast, I apologize. With respect to Pakistan, it acknowledges that what happens in Afghanistan and Pakistan are inextricably linked. And indeed, as we know from reading the newspapers today, our approach to Pakistan has been lacking. And we have overinvested in one leader, and we haven't provided sufficiently for the needs of the Pakistani people. So the platform suggests a reorientation of our approach and conditioning a substantial share of our military assistance on more effective cooperation from the Pakistanis on counterterrorism, and at the same time a substantial increase in our non-military assistance that redounds to the benefit of the Pakistani people, particularly in those areas which are most vulnerable. And beyond Afghanistan and Pakistan, it highlights Senator Obama's comprehensive strategy, which is indeed a long-term strategy, to defeat terrorists through enhanced global partnerships. It highlights his shared security partnership program and the importance of taking a global approach to enhancing the capacity of countries around the world to work with us on intelligence aspects, training, border security operations, anti-corruption, and the like. It also makes a very important statement that I'm not sure you'll find in other platforms. It says the following: a crucial debate is occurring within Islam. The vast majority of Muslims believe in a future of peace, tolerance, development, and democratization. A small minority embrace a rigid and violent intolerance of personal liberty and the world at large. To empower the forces of moderation, America must live up to our values, respect civil liberties, reject torture, and lead by example. We will make every effort to export hope and opportunity, access to education, secure food and water supplies, and healthcare, trade, capital, and investment. We will provide steady support for political reformers, democratic institutions, and civil society that's necessary to uphold human rights and build respect for the rule of law. This theme is echoed elsewhere in the platform, including in a lengthy section on civil liberties. But it makes the argument that Senator Obama believes deeply in, that we can only be successful in the context of our struggle against extremism and terrorism if we are true to our own values. The next section within terrorism, and I won't belabor it, relates to securing our homeland, committing to implement fully the Homeland Security recommendations of the 9/11 Commission, spending our Homeland Security dollars on the basis of risk, and committing to establishing a quadrennial review of the Department of Homeland Security to enable a top-to-bottom assessment of the threats we face and the strategies for confronting them. The final section within terrorism relates to intelligence reform, and it includes some of Senator Obama's commitments made during the campaign, including that to depoliticize intelligence by appointing a director of national intelligence with a fixed term, like the chairman of the Federal Reserve, and to create a bipartisan consultative group of congressional leaders on national security that will meet regularly, not only in the context of a crisis, and finally to establish a national declassification center to ensure greater openness and transparency. The third section is on preventing the spread and use of weapons of mass destruction. This is an issue that has been a very high and early priority for Senator Obama in the Senate, and indeed a centerpiece of his national security policy during the campaign. It focuses on not only the need to defend against the threat from nuclear weapons, but also biological attacks and cyber warfare. It underscores his aim to seek a world with no nuclear weapons and to take concrete actions to move in that direction. It highlights specifically the proposal put forward by George Shultz, Bill Perry, Henry Kissinger, and Sam Nunn, and says that we will maintain a strong, reliable deterrent as long as nuclear weapons exist. And we will achieve reductions through negotiations. But it states that America will be safer in a world that is reducing its reliance on nuclear weapons and ultimately eliminates all of them. It talks also about Senator Obama's commitment to work to secure loose nuclear materials that may be at risk in over 40 countries around the world by the end of his first term. It commits to negotiating a verifiable ban on the production of fissile material, doubling the budget for the IAEA, extending the provisions of the START Treaty, supporting the ratification of the Comprehensive Test Ban Treaty, and strengthening the non-proliferation regime, the NPT. There is a section here on Iran, which is very forceful. It says that the world must prevent Iran from acquiring nuclear weapons, and it posits that this starts with tougher sanctions and aggressive, principled, and direct high-level diplomacy without preconditions. It commits to pursuing this diplomacy alongside and in partnership with our European allies and presenting Iran with a clear choice: abandon its nuclear program in support for terror, threats to Israel, and there are the opportunities for meaningful incentives. So long as Iran refuses, the United States and the international community will further ratchet up the pressure with stronger unilateral sanctions, stronger multilateral sanctions, and sustained efforts and action to isolate the Iranian regime. I'll read you one final sentence in this section. By going the extra diplomatic mile while keeping all options on the table, we make it more likely that the rest of the world will stand with us to increase pressure on Iran if diplomacy is failing. There's a subsequent section on North Korea, which underscores the importance of a verifiable end to all of North Korea's nuclear weapons programs and a full accounting for all fissile material and proliferation activity. Another section on chemical and biological weapons and cybersecurity. Next section is on revitalizing and supporting our military and keeping faith with our veterans. It's a long section, and I won't go into great detail, but it begins with the sentence, "To renew American leadership in the world, we must revitalize our military. A strong military is more than anything necessary to sustain peace." It talks about the use of force and the circumstances in which, and the means by which that would be employed. It reiterates Senator Obama's commitment to increase the Army by 65,000 and the Marine Corps by 27,000. It talks about the need to imbue a sense of public service in our youth, not only a desire to serve in the military, as important as that is, but it specifically mentions serving in our local communities as teachers, first responders, the diplomatic corps, a wide range of means of serving our country. And it talks about configuring and rebuilding our military so that it's suited to 21st century tasks and 21st century challenges. And interestingly, finally, in this section, a section on building our civilian capability, deliberately put in the military section. It stresses that we will build the capacity of U.S. civilian agencies to deploy personnel and area experts where they are needed, so that we no longer have to ask our men and women in uniform to perform non-military tasks. It supports Senator Obama's proposal for creating a volunteer civilian assistance corps and recognizing that to be strong in all respects, we have to invest more than we have in the civilian side of our institutions. It talks about the Veterans Administration, the need to implement the new GI Bill, provide every veteran with access to quality health care for physical and mental injuries, and requiring that all health professionals screen service members upon their return. It makes special mention of PTSD and TBI and the importance of reducing the backlog of disability claims. There's a section on the Guard and Reserve, supporting our military families, and finally, a section, two final sections, one entitled Allowing All Americans to Serve. And here we say, we support the repeal of Don't Ask, Don't Tell, and the implementation of policies to allow qualified men and women to serve openly, regardless of sexual orientation. Finally, a section on contracting, which is a timely topic in light of incidents related to companies like Blackwater, and underscores that we need to use civilian contractors or military contractors only in limited circumstances, not to replace functions that are inherently governmental, and requires that we establish a legal status for contractor personnel so that they're not outside any system of law, whether abroad or here in the United States. The next section is called Working for Our Common Security, and here we talk about rebuilding alliances and partnerships and international institutions. There's a section on Africa, on the Americas, on Asia, on Europe, the Middle East, and indeed emerging powers and global institutions. I could go into depth on each of these, but it's there for you to read.
We'd be happy to have you back.
I think it's worth reading carefully, while I think we succeeded in not making this a Christmas tree platform with every interest having its own sentence or paragraph, there are important statements in here about our relationship with each of these regions. There's mention of Cuba, of Haiti, of Northern Ireland, of Israel and the Middle East peace process and the struggles that pertain in that region, and I think it's quite comprehensive. The penultimate section is called Advancing Democracy and Development and Respect for Human Rights. And here this theme of investing in our common humanity to increase our common security is really amplified. And I'll just read one short excerpt and not go into great depth here. To renew American leadership in the world, we will strengthen our common security by investing in our common humanity. In countries racked by poverty and conflict, citizens long to enjoy freedom from want. Because extremely poor societies and weak states provide optimum breeding grounds for terrorism, disease, and conflict, the United States has a direct national security interest in dramatically reducing global poverty and joining with our allies in sharing more of our riches to help those most in need. goes through with a number of specifics to back that up. And it stresses, very importantly, a theme of importance to Senator Obama and to Senator Clinton, and states that our policies will recognize that human rights are women's rights, and that women's rights are human rights. And it talks about how women make up the majority of the poor in the world, and how expanding economic opportunity for women in the developing world is one very important and sure way to expand opportunity for all. There's a section on global health, including HIV, on human trafficking, and finally the last section on protecting our security and saving our planet. It has a lengthy discussion of energy security and commits to make it a top priority to reduce our oil consumption by at least 35%, or 10 million barrels a day, by the year 2030. And in the adjoining section on climate change, it underscores the commitments that Senator Obama has made not only domestically, but internationally. And the domestic section also treats the energy issue in greater depth. But it calls for us to join with leaders of the biggest carbon-emitting nations in a new global energy forum that will lay the foundation for the next generation of climate protocols. I have gone on too long, but I could have gone on much longer, and would encourage each of you all to spend some time to delve into this and the other parts of the platform. I think they provide an excellent synopsis of Senator Obama and the Democratic Party's approach to foreign policy and national security. It's smart, it's comprehensive, it's tough, and it's geared toward the 21st century. It does not assume that we can tackle 21st century challenges through 20th century tools or frames.
Susan, I want to thank you. I just want to say before we let Susan go that she's done a great favor. We appreciate very much your leadership, but coming in before you're about to race off to the airport. So we're going to continue with Karen, but I feel obligated to put one question to you, which would say that putting a platform together like this is a combination of sort of macro agenda items and micro issues. And it would be very interesting and I think newsworthy to know how you think the ecosystem that we have today in Eastern Europe around Russia, Georgia, the situation, how that ecosystem after Barack Obama had been in government for a while might have looked different in the sense of what might be included in your thinking about national security issues that would deal with self-determination movements, or would deal with, great power rivalries, or would deal with, building institutions in Eastern Europe. In other words, I think we've seen a major crisis and a near collision between several great powers that very few were paying attention to. And I'm sort of interested in how the Barack Obama plan would look differently if he had been in office with that situation.
That's sort of multifaceted and convoluted. I'm not sure if you're asking me to comment on Russia, Georgia.
Well, I'm sort of interested, if you guys were at the helm, how would you deal with it?
Okay. I will be very careful here. I am not going to comment on this administration's approach to Russia or the challenge in Georgia. I have much I could say, but I don't think it's frankly constructive. At this point, Secretary Rice is out in the region. We want to very much support her efforts. It's not the time for a who shot John as to whether this might have been dealt with differently. So I want to be a little bit
that's fair.
Uncharacteristically reticent to go there. But the bottom line is that Senator Obama is unequivocal and very firm in his support for Georgia's sovereignty and territorial integrity. The Russian actions and the Russian invasion of Georgia is absolutely unacceptable. It's a massive violation of international law, and we're learning every hour seemingly a massive violation of international human rights as well. And it needs to be dealt with firmly. The fact is that Senator Obama supported last spring very strongly a membership action plan for Georgia and indeed for Ukraine. And it's unfortunate that was not able to be accomplished at that point. We are where we are, and we need the ceasefire fully implemented. Russia has to adhere to the commitments that it has made and broken. There should not be a restoration of the status quo ante. Indeed, we need international monitors and international peacekeeping force in there that is truly impartial and independent, and we need a negotiated solution to the underlying political conflict. And finally, there need to be consequences for what has transpired. And Senator Obama's view is that we need to review all aspects of our bilateral and multilateral arrangements with Russia in order to assess where they ought to go from here, in light not only of what has transpired in the last week, but also in light of whether or not Russia implements the agreement that it's committed to. I'll stop
Susan,
there.
thank you very much for spending time with us. Thank you so much. Good luck on your trip. Now welcome Karen Kornblue, principal author of the Democratic Party platform.
Don't ask me about Georgia, Steve.
No, that was just for Susan.
So one thing that I didn't stress before that I want to talk about for a minute is what a different process Barack Obama ran and the Democratic Party ran this time. Usually there may be some regional hearings of the platform. In 2004 there were 4 regional hearings that were held. This time, even though we only had a month to write the whole thing, Barack Obama decided that he wanted to do a characteristic thing and open up the platform writing process to Americans. And so we had a process called Listening to America. It was almost like a meet-up kind of thing where anyone could have a platform hearing. You signed up on the website, you said where you were going to have it. If somebody wanted to attend one, they could see where there were going to be hearings in their area. And these things were amazing. There were 1,645, even though people had almost no notice. There was only a week to hold them. 30,000 people participated. It was really amazing. And people sent in reports of what had happened at these hearings, and we read them and took account of them. And so a lot of this reflects, a lot of what you see in the platform reflects what was discussed in those hearings. We also have quotes throughout the platform taken from those hearings, and also we wound up having when the drafting committee met in Cleveland, there was a day of testimony from experts and then half a day of testimony from people who had been pulled from these hearings so that the drafting committee could hear directly from people who had gone to these listening hearings. So we have quotes from those people as well. And then there's an appendix that's being released today with the platform that has quotes from all 50 states and lists all the hearings that happened so that that's reflected. And what's so amazing about that, I went to a couple of these hearings, and at one of them, at the end, someone said, well, how are we all going to stay in touch? You know, is somebody getting all our emails and going to share them with us? How can we all help Barack Obama get his agenda through? And that really spoke to me of the genius of this sort of community organizing approach, not only to a primary, but now to the general election where he's opening up the platform process, and also to governing. If the same people who have been so involved up till now stay involved, then maybe when a Harry and Louise ad is run, these people can stay involved and tell their neighbors, you know, what's really going on and what's really important, and then in turn they can all weigh in with their members of Congress and we can actually see some change. So I just wanted to make sure everyone knew about that really special part of this process. I'll just turn right now back to the substance of it. So this first section is called Renewing the American Dream, and that's really about getting at the fact that incomes have been stagnating, we're not creating jobs the way we were, and then also we have this immediate economic crisis that we're in right now. So there are 4 sections to that. One section is on jumpstarting the economy and providing middle-class Americans immediate relief. That's really about the stimulus. There's another section that's about empowering families for a new era. That should be very familiar for those of you at New America, which is really about sort of remaking a lot of the New Deal social contract for the new age. How do you give people security, but also the ability to go out there and take risks in a totally new economy where you're not necessarily getting your health care through your employer, you're not necessarily getting a pension through your employer, or it's a little less secure than it was. So that talks about, the first section of that is affordable quality health care coverage for all Americans. And we did a lot of discussions between the Obama folks and the Senator Clinton's folks, and also people who supported single payer, to craft a very long plank on health care. It's the longest, I think, that you've ever seen in a platform. And what it emphasizes is how united Democrats are on health care reform. You know, I think in the primary you heard the small areas where people were divided. In this document you see how incredibly divided we are, and it goes through principle after principle after principle on which we're united. Sorry?
How united.
How united?
Yeah, you said how divided.
Oh, how united. Thank you very much. We're so united. We're not divided. And, you know, it goes through principle after principle. And, you know, if anyone wants to talk about it, we can talk about it. But it has very clear language about how important it is to cover everyone. And it's important morally, but it's also important to make the system work. And it goes through shared responsibility and how we're going to make it affordable and so on. It's really, it's not a how-to, but it's a what we stand for and what our principles are, and it's fantastic. There's also in that section pensions, shoring up pensions, but also creating these portable pensions. What do we do to ensure that jobs that we do have are good jobs with good pay? Work and family. First time there's been a section on that in this document. A section on poverty. That's very strong, and a separate section on opportunity for women. And I should just say that this document is really, I think, the strongest. Ellie Smeal just said it's the strongest platform she's seen on women. It's also really emphasizes family issues as well. So not only do you have a work and family section, you have a children and family section in the community area with a subsection on fatherhood. Barack Obama has put a big emphasis on fatherhood. And you'll see women mentioned in the poverty section because, of course, single-parent families, poor women are a big issue as far as poverty goes. In the seniors section, you see a mention of women. So what you see throughout here is a real big emphasis on women and families. The next section is on investing in American competitiveness. This is really the investment agenda, and I'm sure Maya's going to have something to say about shortly. And there we focus on energy is the first issue, and energy comes up, as Susan said, 4 times in the platform. There's a section on energy. In the domestic part, there's a section on the environment, and then in the foreign policy section, there's also a section on energy and a section on environment. And this stresses how incredibly important this set of issues is to the country, to the world, and to the Democratic Party. And we lay out a very aggressive strategy for energy independence, for investing in renewable energies, clean energy, and talk about how important it is for the economy, national security, and the climate. We also have a section on education that goes through early education and a commitment to giving every child quality early education, to a K-12 strategy that talks about teachers and paying them more and more accountability. And then there's a whole separate section on higher education. It talks about the role of higher education, not only in terms of getting people prepared for not only giving people 4-year education and beyond, but also community colleges in terms of lifelong learning and giving people technical skills to function in the community. And that leads very naturally into a section on science and technology as well. And then, interestingly enough, the next section is on investing in manufacturing, but also it talks about our manufacturing communities. So what's going on in Michigan, what's going on in Ohio, some of these communities that really need some special attention as they're transitioning in this new economy. We have a section on infrastructure that goes into Senator Obama's plan for an infrastructure bank to make sure that we have roads and bridges that work, that we have broadband, so we're not laggards in the world on that. And then there's a new section on a connected America. And what you'll note is that technology is really front and center here. We have a section in the economic section on a connected America that talks about the challenges of the wired economy in terms of data privacy, in terms of children, and the opportunities we can have. It talks about media and the need to not have concentration of the media. And then in the democracy section at the end, you'll see a whole section on an open, accountable, and ethical government. And in that section as well, we talk about the role of technology, again, as I was saying with these platform hearings, and giving people an opportunity to participate in their government using technology as long as we have the openness and the tools. So I'll just start to speed up a little bit. But we have another section on economic stewardship that talks about how we can restore fairness, how we can get some regulation that actually makes the market work for everyone, and that talks about fiscal responsibility and trade policies. And then the last 2 sections I think are really important, and I really don't want them to be overlooked. The section on renewing the American community is really about how do we reestablish this common ground? How do we get this common good back? How do we get this sense of stewardship and sacrifice and service back? And really, it has to happen at a family level, at a community level. So it talks about Barack Obama's request that everyone serve, doubling the Peace Corps, expanding AmeriCorps, creating an an internet website where people can find out about volunteering opportunities. It talks about a deal we're going to make with people, with kids, that if they serve, then they'll get a huge chunk of their college paid for. Very big deal about getting people to serve in the military. It talks about faith and the importance of faith to our country and our party, and also how faith-based organizations are at the ground level solving many of our problems, and how we can encourage people to be involved in those. Talks about the importance of cities and metropolitan areas. And as I said, it talks about fatherhood and children and families, and of course the civil rights agenda that's very important in terms of making sure that everyone's included and that everyone has an opportunity to participate as well. We have also a discussion of Katrina and a number of other things, but you get the idea that it's really about what tangible steps can we take to really establish that common ground and that sense that we're all in it together, so that people are up to the challenges that we need to face. And then the last section specifically addresses what are we going to do to revive our American democracy? How are we going to get government to work again? And there's a very strong ethics component there. We talk about ending the revolving door, gift ban, public financing. We talk about free time and the media. And we also talk about openness. Barack Obama has championed a number of issues to make government more open, from a bill that he passed called Google for Government, colloquially, and what that's supposed to do is allow you to check online and see any contracts that are being given out, any appropriations. So that would be continued, but also we would post bills online so that people could check them out before they're voted, none of that dark of night stuff. Also, that he would tell his cabinet secretaries that they would have to have online fireside chats so that people could really know what was going on and participate. So it's using technology and openness to really allow people to do that kind of thing that the people in the hearing that I went to were really craving, so that they could participate. And as Susan said, there's a very strong section on civil liberties. And just to tick off some of the things in there: rejecting illegal wiretapping of American citizens, rejecting torture, not using signing statements to nullify or undermine duly enacted laws. We will not ship away prisoners in the dead of night. You wouldn't think we would need to say these things. To be tortured in far-off countries. We will respect habeas corpus. We will close the detention camp in Guantanamo Bay. So really, it's very strong civil liberties section that talks about the value of our Constitution, the false choices we've been presented, and how we have to move forward. And then also there's another section on in here on nonprofits and social entrepreneurialism, and how we need to have a very strong civic sector that's thriving for us to sort of revive our democracy and get us moving again. So I think it's a very rich document. I hope you all read it. And I think it really shows that Democrats are unbelievably unified in a positive vision, and that they, it's not a question of tinkering. We really need to shift the ocean liner and move in a really new direction, and that we have some very specific, tangible ways to do that. So thank you very much.
Karen, thank you. Thank you, Karen. We're now going to have some other comments. I should also add there's a nice little section I care about, which is advocating, regular voting rights for citizens of D.C.
There you go.
And I should also mention that I spoke to the drafting staff of the Republican National Committee yesterday, and we've invited them to also come and do this. And we're hoping, in fact, I'm going to be working hopefully with former Congressman Jim Colby and encouraging them to do that. We'll see if we can do it, but it looked like they were very interested in a September event. But let me invite Steve Cole to share about 4 or 5 minutes of thoughts up here at the podium, and then Maya McGinnis. Steve Cole, our president and a staff writer for the New Yorker magazine.
Thanks, Steve. Thank you, Karen and Susan before her, for doing this today. It was really fascinating to listen to you talk about the process as well as the material. I thought I would just talk for a couple of minutes about the foreign policy section inside one, and make some observations inside one framework, which is, I think, if you ask why do platforms matter, the answer is more pointed perhaps in the here and now on the foreign policy side, because I think what's happening in a number of areas in this platform is that the ideas and the framework of a prospective Obama presidency is already shaping the conduct of the American permanent national security bureaucracy, by which I mean the uniformed military and the intelligence communities and other sections of the national security bureaucracy. They are anticipating many of the particular policies that are in this document, and while not fully committing national government to them, obviously, nonetheless are preparing the ground in interesting ways. And I thought I would just mention 3 examples, having just returned from Iraq. Senator Obama's basic strategic argument that Iraq was a distraction from the Pakistan-Afghan theater and that the United States has lost ground there substantially because of the distraction of Iraq is a view that has currency in the national security bureaucracy and in the military as well, where it's not a particularly political argument, it's just a strategic argument. And so this notion that there is an opportunity to redeploy and an imperative to redeploy, so firmly articulated during the campaign and now laid out in this document, is actually giving permission, in a sense, for the preparation of this redeployment. So just as a general election campaign brings both candidates into a common argument about the first 6 months of or the first year of their administrations, the national security bureaucracy starts to prepare. You see this now in the way Iraq policy is moving. It's already so far ahead of where it was 3 or 4 months ago, precisely because of the stimulus that the campaign has provided to it. So there's already an accelerant in the preparation for transition to Iraqi leads in the conduct of the counterinsurgency campaign. There is detailed planning that wouldn't otherwise be occurring about the pace of brigade drawdowns and the preparation for flowing into Afghanistan. On the Afghan side, you see this in a new permissiveness among field commanders to talk about military requirements in Afghanistan. Frankly, in the era of Secretary of Defense Donald Rumsfeld, there was a kind of suppression of honest military advice, particularly in Afghanistan, because there was a recognition that there was no point to ask for more troops since none were coming. And it was not sort of healthy to one's career to simply ask over and over again for something that was unwelcome. And part of what the campaign, and particularly the specificity of this platform, has done is to create a new environment in which people are starting to have a conversation in advance that they imagine they would have in February or March of next year. And that number of 2 brigades as a minimum is now specific currency, as you saw in the departing commander from Afghanistan's press conference a couple of weeks ago. There's a level of specificity about military requirements that just wasn't in the discourse 2 or 3 months ago. And then finally, on the Pakistan side, which I think is the other place where this effect is already occurring, if you look at the Biden-Lugar bill that's in front of the Congress, it's essentially a bill that rebalances the U.S. relationship with Pakistan away from a location in military and security policies and aid overwhelmingly to a much broader-based project of a sustainable relationship committed to Pakistani democracy and to the Pakistani constitution and to the Pakistani people, in addition to the Pakistani security forces. And that bill, which was negotiated over the last 3 to 6 months on a bipartisan basis, is almost certain to become the framework for U.S. policy to Pakistan next year, but it's already happened because of the discourse that's flowed through these platforms. It's anticipatory, not just inside the bureaucracy, but also in the Congress. So anyway.
Great. Thank you very much, Steve. Now, Maya McGinnis, please.
Thank you. Karen, thanks so much for joining us for this event today. And Steve Clemons has, of course, surpassed his own world record for pulling an event together in the shortest amount of time. Just to comment on what happens when your colleague offers you an opportunity to be on a panel the night before at 6 o'clock, I realized I'd actually never read a platform before. And so I went home with my draft copy of the platform, fed my kids real quickly, put them in front of Dora the Explorer and started reading through the platform, and got most of the way through kind of the first section, which notably is on the economic issues and investment issues, and thought I'd better compare this to what the Republicans have written. So I then put the kids in front of Diego, Dora's trusty sidekick, and went back and read the 2004 Republican platform, then thought, oh, I better compare this to what the Democrats did 4 years ago. Turned on a show called Pinky Dinky Doo, let my kids watch that, and then went up and finished the platform while letting them watch YouTube a new song by Gummy Bears Dancing, which I recommend. And I then got to this line in the platform. For parents, our first and most sacred responsibility is to support our children. We must set an example, turn off the TV. So I will say that I went from feeling rather inspired by the platform to feeling rather deflated. Beyond my own personal shortcomings as a parent, what I want to focus on is kind of the vision of the platform and also some of the trade-offs. So what's very important is that the front part of this platform, 4 years ago for the Democrats, it was about national security, and they flipped them. The beginning part is all about the whole renewing of the American dream. And there is so much to be inspired here. I think what's really notable is that the economic security and investment issues are very forward-looking. It's got a very modern and aspirational feel to it. When you talk about health care, when they talk about savings, when they talk about work, much of this is thinking about how this needs to work for the 21st century, recognizing all the changes that have taken place in the way families work, in the way work mobility works, and the new challenges of the economy, particularly the new need for flexibility, movement, breaking away from the employers, and growing income inequality that's in this country. So they have a lot of policies that address that head on. I think that's exactly where we should be as a country, and it's not surprising because much of this is similar to a lot of the work that Karen helped to inform when we started our Next Social Contract program here at New America. It's a lot of the kinds of things you've probably heard us that we focus on here. Likewise, the investment section. I think Karen was probably a little worried that I would have some resistance to this part, and I don't. I think that it's actually a remarkable opportunity in the country right now for a renewed investment agenda. And what's very exciting about this platform is that it's not kind of the we'll build more bridges and not looking beyond that. Once again, it's a modern investment strategy. So it focuses on energy independence, basic research and development, high-speed rails, broadband, the use of technology, all the things that we really need to be thinking about reinvigorating our economy through thinking about the long-term investments that I think have been shortchanged over the past decades. At the same time that I think we have a new opportunity for a renewed investment agenda, I think there are a lot of pitfalls, and that happens if you don't do this smart, targeted, and strategic, which I got the sense there's a lot of thinking about that from reading the platform. To talk about what I think is missing, it's hard not to read through this and think, good idea, good idea, good idea, good idea, good idea. There's less emphasis on something I think we'll probably see in the Republican platform, which I think is worth emphasizing, which is the economic growth side of this. There are a lot of ideas which will be in that platform, things like reforming the corporate income tax, things like commitments to open and free trade, things like controlling spending, that are the other side of kind of economic security and investment. And I think this is not how platforms work. I realize that as a political independent who kind of thinks collaborative governance would be the best way to move forward. Platforms are, you know, the two sides stating their points. But there's a lot to learn from each other, and if you compartmentalize less, you could have a pretty terrific vision. That said, what I think will be missing from both the platforms is how you pay for all these things. So just for a moment, to go over the situation we face, we do have a budget deficit that's going to be upwards of $500 billion in this coming year, $700 billion if you don't count what we're taking from Social Security. The Republicans, the Democrats, when they write about fiscal responsibility, they emphasize the notion of pay-go, which is something that I think is very useful. You need to pay for all the new initiatives that you have. But there's one kind of arcane issue that's plaguing both the Democrats and Republicans, which is that they are applying sort of this notion of paying for things only after we make the 2001-2003 tax cuts permanent and assume fixes for the alternative minimum tax. Those may sound like not very interesting things, but in terms of numbers, they cost $400 billion a year. So we're talking about a very significant fiscal hole that we have no plan yet for how to close. In terms of health care, we know that the #1 driving fiscal problem in the country is growing health care costs. And so while I think that all these things are included in the platform, I think we have to kind of shift the balance between health care to include coverage, quality, and controlling costs. That's the most important thing we can do for the health of the long-term budget. Social Security, they put forward an idea that would deal with just a small fraction of Social Security and at the same time said it's not a big problem. Well, if it's not a big problem, we know that there are long-term issues out there facing the country that aren't inspiring to talk about how we'll fix them because they involve raising taxes and cutting spending. But at some point, in order to have kind of the honest discussion we're going to need to have, we have to bring those things into the discussion. The platform might not be the right moment, but you don't want to forget them. Just finally, kind of in the big picture, I do think there's probably a mismatch between the menu of things we would like to do and the notion that we will only raise taxes on people making over $250,000. I just don't think we'll be able to make the numbers add up. This is not meant to be critical on one side of the aisle, because I would have very, very similar criticisms for the other side. We are running a project here where we're looking at the cost of all the policies, and neither candidate is on track to really deal sufficiently with the fiscal challenges we face. But just to sum up, I think what is in here is absolutely the kind of recipe we need for long-term investments and economic security in the country. There's just the other half of it, which is how do you combine that with growth? How do you combine that with fiscal responsibility? And while there are lots of great ideas here, there's also a tough road ahead for paying for those things. Thank you.
Thank you, Maya. And now we're going to have some fun posing some questions and having a discussion. I'm going to open the floor, but I'm going to ask, is my staff out here with the microphone? Mike, okay, you've got the microphone. Sam, this is Sam Sheridan. If you're a good friend of his, you might get to ask questions, because there's going to be so many. But I'm going to open up with one, because I'm going to embarrass Karen for a minute. Karen is not as well known as she should be for coining two of the most important phrases of the contemporary challenges. One is the mommy tax, and the other is our juggler families. And I remember in the 2004 elections, she may not recall it this way, I watched Howard Dean and Lieberman and others that were, hoping to achieve the White House, essentially adopt Karen's language early on. At the time, I remember her telling me that her former boss, John Kerry, was the only one who wasn't. But the question I have is, to what degree has this orientation and concern about juggler families and the mommy tax, which you authored, become part of the internal DNA, forged in the inside of Barack Obama's vision?
Thanks. Thanks, Steve. I think it's this whole approach of how families have changed and how the economy has changed, two things that New America's been talking about for a long time, I think are very much part of the DNA of where the Democratic Party is right now. And I think there's a real understanding that we can't tinker around the margins, that the economy has changed so much and the family has changed so much, both in terms of the fact that all parents, in so many families, all parents are working. Either it's a single parent who's working, or it's two parents and they're both working, taking care of children, but also taking care of elderly parents. And Hillary Clinton actually spoke about this very eloquently during the primary. She talked about the sandwich generation. So this is an issue that both Barack and Senator Clinton have talked about their whole lives. I mean, in Barack Obama's book, Audacity of Hope, he has a whole chapter devoted to family and how families have changed in his own family and his wife's family growing up, and what we need to do to support families today. And he talks about that very broadly and not, again, as a marginal issue, but really front and center of why we have to change a lot of our policies. The one other thing I'll just tag on to that, just to respond to Maya, and I know I'm supposed to keep my answer short, I'm sorry. But I do think that one way to look at the investment section of the economics is really about growth. And I think growth is I'm glad Maya brought it up. I think it's a hugely important issue. I don't think people are interested in dividing a pie that's static or shrinking. I mean, people really want to see America growing again and increasing productivity, and sharing the fruits of that widely. And so the investment part of this, the education, the infrastructure, and so on, really is supposed to be about going in that direction.
Okay, great. Let me open the floor. Right here, this gentleman. Oh, and I'm going to say, identify yourself, please. Ask one question and make it brief, because Karen's going to be brief back. We're going to try and get a lot on the table.
Promise.
Go ahead.
Of course. I'm Luke Engen, a reporter from Inside U.S. Trade. I wanted to ask about the trade policy section, which you skimmed over briefly. Of course, it lists a series of benchmarks for free trade agreements and pledges to stand up to agreements that don't make the cut. To what extent do the three pending free trade agreements with Colombia...
Got it. Okay. Trade.
Well, I think Barack Obama and a lot of the Democrats in Congress have already taken positions on a lot of the pending agreements that are out there. So I think that the answer to that is pretty clear. And what they've laid out is sort of, okay, beyond the trade agreements that are in front of us, what's the recipe going forward? And that's what he talks about. And you'll notice that they also talk about Doha. It also talks about making the WTO more transparent. It talks about better enforcement.
And a lot about labor and environment framework.
A lot about labor and environment. And then a key piece of that plank, the trade plank, is that trade has to be an integrated part of your overall economic strategy. It can't be off to the side. And actually, Barack Obama wrote an op-ed about CAFTA when he decided not to vote for it, and talked about that was why he was not voting for it. It was less the specific agreement of CAFTA, and it was much more that the Bush administration had failed to deal with globalization and failed to deal with trade in an integrated response. And so that's really what that plank reflects.
Ben, right behind you.
Thank you. Hi, Ben Branzel. Karen, so I'm interested in asking you about the grassroots participation element of the platform, historic and really exciting. And I'm wondering if you can reference for us any particular products or outcomes of that process that you found surprising or that pushed the platform in a way it wouldn't have otherwise gone, things that were included because of that or changes that were made because of that grassroots input.
Interesting. This is the grassroots guy, so.
Yeah, I mean, definitely there was, we refer to the Manhattan Project or Apollo Project because people in platform hearing after platform hearing talked about that. We talk about, one thing that I found in the platform hearing I went to is that people just use rhetoric differently. You know, in Washington, you start to use these catchphrases that stop meaning anything to anybody. And so instead of saying investment, people at the hearing I went to talked about investing back, which I just thought was fabulous. We use that. There's another one that's escaping me, but a big issue was, people talked about healthcare an awful lot, and that's one of the reasons it's front and center. It's really the first major plank right after the stimulus, and people talked about all different kinds of approaches. Single payer did come up a lot, and so we were very cognizant that Democrats have a lot of different approaches to health care, and so you'll see the language is very inclusive, and it specifically says Democrats have a lot of different approaches, and we're going to work this out in the legislative process. So I think that's a big one. You'll also see we really wanted to make sure people felt their voices were heard, so there's an appendix that's quite long that has quotes from each of the 50 states and then a listing of all the platforms to make sure that it's really reflected. Somebody did an analysis on Huffington, actually, where he said, gee, I was curious to see if my platform hearing was reflected in the actual platform. And he went through and found time after time after time. I was so pleased by that, yeah.
Did Jim Colby have his hand up? No, okay, right here in the middle.
Will Straw from the Centre for American Progress. Just following up on the trade question, one of the ways to make globalization work is to ensure that living standards around the world are rising. So I wanted to ask about the development angle. What is the policy say about putting social safety nets in place in some of the developing countries and middle-income countries?
You know what, I would be shot if I tried to talk about the foreign policy section, so I'm not going to. But it is significant that in the trade section we do talk about development. So we're not looking at this as a zero-sum game. We're not looking at this as, we've got our domestic platform, we've got a foreign policy platform. I mean, part of a Barack Obama administration would be about seeing that rising living standards, that prosperity across the world and opportunity across the world is good for Americans. And so it's not a zero-sum trade approach.
Yes, in the back here, and then we'll come to Norman. I do have to say that I did make this arrangement a deal because we wanted Derek Chollet, Anthony Blinken, and Susan Rice were the three principal helpers on the foreign policy side. We worked very hard to get Susan here. The other two are out of town, and so I don't want Karen shot by anyone. So let's just respect that. Yes.
Hi, I'm Josiah Ryan from CNS News. I had a quick question about the getting out of Iraq section.
Sorry.
Not at all?
No, sorry. No, really.
All right, thank you.
Yeah. Sorry. Yes, right here.
Hi, I'm Jessica Zucolo with Medley Advisors. I just wanted to ask a little bit about the Connected Nation section of the technology section of the platform.
Sure.
Okay. Technology's good.
What did you want to ask about
I just want for you to maybe go into a little bit more detail about it because I think it's very extensive and very impressive that a lot of people don't know about.
Yeah, oh, thanks. Yeah, I mean, and this is also something that will be familiar to people here. I mean, the idea that our economy, John McCain has not discovered that we have a connected America, but we actually do. People use the internet, they use the Google, and it's obviously changed the way commerce works, it's changed the way daily life works, and so we wanted to have a section that talked about the extensive technology policy that Barack has that's not just about growing the economy, we talk about that in the science and tech part, but it's also about just doing our business and our socializing through the internet. So it does talk about data privacy, it does talk about what do we do for children to help them find content that's positive, that media has public interest obligations, that we should avoid over concentration of the media, and it just lays out a pretty extensive, not only set of policies, but a real appreciation and approach for what the internet has done to all our lives.
Sam, right here in the very back. I'll get to all of you. We'll get to everybody, don't worry. I get these frowns when I don't call on someone. Yes, go ahead.
Hi, Gloria Tristani, and thank you for giving us a brief look at the platform. I know you had to run through some of the domestic parts, but I was wondering what the platform states on immigration.
On immigration.
On immigration. I should just say we have 2 former FCC commissioners in the audience. We have Gloria Tristani and Susan Ness.
Cool.
On immigration, it has...
Besides the mommy tax, Karen was also Miss Broadband here.
Yeah.
So,
So the immigration section, you know, really reflects a lot of work and thinking by Brock and Democrats on this, you know, issue that's become a wedge issue that's been used to divide people. And I'm looking for the section right now. It really calls that out and says we can't let this issue divide us. And so I'm gonna stick to the text. It starts out with a paragraph that's very appreciative of immigration and immigrants, and says America has always been a nation of immigrants. Over the years, millions of people have come here in the hope that in America you can make it if you try. Each successive wave of immigrants has contributed to our country's rich culture, economy, and spirit. Like the immigrants that came before them, today's immigrants will shape their own destinies and enrich our country. So a very positive statement about immigrants and their contribution. And then it goes on to say in a separate paragraph that our current immigration system is broken. It's been broken for far too long. We need comprehensive immigration reform. We have to work together in a way, not a way that divides us by playing on our worst instincts and fears, and that we're committed to a tough, practical, and humane immigration reform in the first year of the next administration. The next paragraph talks about enforcement, and talks about the fact that we can't allow people to enter the United States undetected, undocumented, and unchecked. And it talks about what we're going to do, that we're going to have additional customs and border protection agencies, dismantle human smuggling organizations. We need to crack down on employers who hire the undocumented immigrants. And it states very clearly it's a problem when we only enforce our laws against the immigrants themselves with raids that are ineffective, tear apart families, and leave people detained without adequate access to counsel. But it does say that we need a way for employers to check, and so we would have a method to do that that would be fair. And then it also talks about improving the legal immigration system so that the naturalization process is fair and the visa process works better. And then it also talks about for the millions that are living here illegally but otherwise playing by the rules, that they would be required to come out of the shadows, get right with the law, and then they would pay a fine, pay taxes, learn English, and then they would be able to go to the back of the line for the opportunity to be citizens. So it's a very detailed, very balanced approach to immigration.
right in front here, right in front of this, Gloria. Yeah, no, right? Yeah.
Hi, Jonathan Harwitz, House Housing Subcommittee, and I'll ask this Kleeman style. Housing, helping communities deal with 800,000 foreclosed properties and growing, preventing future foreclosures, and dealing with 8 years of disinvestment in federally subsidized housing.
Great. Housing crisis.
Housing crisis. Yeah. Well, we talk about in the very first section about the stimulus and the immediate help that we need. We talk about implementing the current bill, including all the parts that George Bush didn't like that speak to what you're talking about. But then we have a separate section on housing that I'm quickly turning pages to find, that does talk about specific policies on housing policy and what we need to do to address exactly the issues that you're talking about, to have a balanced housing policy. I'm not finding it, but...
Okay. This gentleman right here, been very patient.
Yeah, the Administration on Aging found that more than half the elderly women living in poverty, but not in poverty before their husbands died. I'm with the Men's Health Network. What about an Office of Men's Health to promote healthy behaviors among men?
Well, that's an interesting idea. We don't have that specifically in here. We do have in the healthcare section an extensive discussion of prevention, chronic care management, wellness, public health, and research that go into a whole bunch of issues dealing with giving people the tools that they need to be well and to stay well.
I'd like to help you with that.
Okay, good.
Will Bauer, Mr. Puma. Any of you have been following Puma?
Hi, Will Bauer with Puma and Just Say No Deal here. My question is simple. How will the platform be addressing the need for primary reform and caucus reform?
I don't think it does actually deal with primary
That's
reform.
my question, thank you.
That's really, no, because and there's a reason for that. There are 3 committees that are set up, 3 standing committees. There's a rules committee, there's a credentials committee, and there's a platform committee. And so those are really issues that are appropriately dealt with the other 2 committees and not with the platform itself.
Thank you.
Great. Right up here in the front. and then this lady, and then Norm.
Hi, my name is Adam Serwer. I'm from the American Prospect, and I just wanted to ask. Traditionally, the issue of fatherhood has been presented as one of the root causes of poverty, but generally, it's often also discussed as a kind of intractable cultural problem. So, how is the Democratic Party's approach to it different?
Thanks for asking that.
The daddy tax.
There is a whole separate section on fatherhood. This has been an issue that obviously Barack Obama feels passionately about. His first book was Dreams of My Father. He has co-sponsored a bill twice now in the last Congress, and then they reintroduced it this year with Evan Bayh on fatherhood. And it talks about supporting fathers. It talks about job training for people who are entering the workforce, but also people who are transitioning up in the workforce using these very proven policies. It also talks about child support reform so that the child support payments don't go into the bureaucracy but actually go to help support the children. It talks about penalizing people who don't make their child support payments. But as much as he has actual policies on fatherhood, he's also used his bully pulpit and actually gave a speech last Father's Day where he talked about the importance of fatherhood, the importance of fathers to their children, how they have to turn off the television, Maya.
Yes, ma'am.
I'm Barbara Cambridge from the National Council of Teachers of English. I was interested in your K through 12 segment. You mentioned paying teachers more, which is extremely important, but over 50% of our students are not even graduating from high school, and I wondered what other provisions you have for supporting those students.
Well, the education section is quite lengthy and very detailed, and so I would really encourage you to read it. And what it talks about is reforming No Child Left Behind, that Barack Obama and the Democrats endorse a lot of the goals of No Child Left Behind, but would like to see some real changes, including putting some money there, not labeling schools as failing and then not supporting them. But it also talks about teachers and paying teachers more, asking them to do more, giving them more support, accountability, so that teachers are paid more for being effective in terms of the results that you see from children. And then there are a bunch of issues like summer opportunities, after school, that would help children not to drop out. And then I don't want to neglect the preschool, the early education, which is so important, that so many of our kids are left behind before they even get into kindergarten. And so there's a real emphasis on those 0 to 5 years, child care, but also schooling.
Norman?
Yeah, I'm Norman Birnbaum from the editorial board of The Nation. Look, I know you don't want to talk about foreign and military policy, but there is one question which does seem a little bit unavoidable, beginning precisely with your admirable emphasis on domestic policy. How can all this investment be paid for, particularly in a period of economic constriction and crisis, if in fact the military budget goes unexamined?
Well, it's a great question, and I'm not at all reluctant to talk about that. I mean, one of the things that Barack Obama has laid out is a plan for getting out of Iraq responsibly and for using that money to invest domestically, and he's been making a big point of that. His current advertisement actually talks about how important that is. So that's a huge priority, and that comes through in the document. Secondly, a second big way that we're going to deal with our budget situation, as Maya said, going forward, the biggest challenge is really healthcare costs. When you look at how the numbers are broken out, it's not even the demographic issue. It's not even that people are aging that leads to the high deficits in the future. It's really healthcare cost explosion. And so that's one of the reasons that healthcare has got to be so important. It's important morally, just that we give people healthcare in this country, but it's also important in terms of our budget issues, that if we get everyone covered and we start to manage quality and we start to get the data and we start to get the systems in place to change incentives, that we can actually start to rein in some of those exploding costs and deal with the deficit that way.
Do you deal with capital budgets at all?
No.
No? Okay. Back room, lady in white. And then the lady in black.
Krista Rosario from the Citizens Commission on Civil
I
Rights.
need to use your lungs.
Oh, okay, sorry. I thought the microphone would do the job.
I just have bad ears.
We've been reading that Obama's taken the big tent approach to his education advisors, kind of including a lot of different perspectives. And I'm just curious if there was any disagreement in coming to this education platform amongst those advisors. And
Big tent conflict education advisors.
No. No, actually, there really wasn't. I mean, Barack Obama's been extremely clear in his statements on education policy and his speeches, and he's given a few recently. He gave a speech on competitiveness where he talked about education, and so really this plank really, we didn't have time to have a lot of advisors come together to work on each plank in the platform. We pulled a lot of this from things that we know Democrats as a whole support, and also from statements that Brock has made on the stump. And so this really is a very clear statement of where he is.
Yes, ma'am.
Catherine Keatley, Georgetown University and George Washington University. So this is a higher education question. Do you have any mention of international education and foreign language education?
You know, that's something that Senator Obama has talked about, foreign language education, how important it is. We actually did not wind up mentioning it here, but it's something that he cares a lot about. It just didn't make it in.
Right, gentleman in the very back, and then right here in the middle. We'll get around, and then I've completely neglected this gentleman here. We'll get to you.
Okay. Yeah. Okay, I'm...
Ask quickly. You got 30 seconds.
I'm Jerome Dantis. I'm a retired mathematics professor, and math professors are quite concerned that students know considerably less arithmetic than they did 20 years ago. So the question is, will Obama support the reinstatement of arithmetic without calculators as the bulk of K-7 math instruction?
Okay, got it.
Quite in contrast to NSF funding of textbooks which have been undermining the instruction in arithmetic.
I got it. Math without calculators.
Well, you know, we actually have tried not to get into that level of detail specificity. It was really interesting. When I started out, everyone said, you know, you really want to be thematic. You know, look at the 1992 platform that was only 22 pages long. You want to be thematic and not get into detail. And then they would proceed to tell you, except on this one issue, Native Hawaiians that I really care about.
There's a lot of detail in this thing, though. I've read it. The first document I had was 55 pages long.
But on the issue of mathematics and science education, we do talk about that and its importance in K-12. We talk about how we want women and girls to go into science and math, and we talk about it in our science and technology and innovation section, but we don't get into the calculator issue.
Yes, sir.
Right here. I'm Drew Stein. I'm an intern from Senator Clinton's office. I just had a question about the Revive American Democracy section of the Renewing the American Dream
But get to the question really quick. Okay?
Program?
We have a lot of questions.
My question is the portion about rejecting illegal wiretapping.
Yeah.
Does it say anything about retroactive immunity to the telecommunications company? Are you familiar with the FISA bill?
Yep, I am.
That was
Thank
passed
you.
last month. I know Senator Obama
got
voted
it.
yes on that, so
We
I
got
wanted
it.
to
Thank
know
you.
what the
FISA.
position on that was.
Let's see. We do say that, I want to get this absolutely right. We do say, we don't actually bring up the FISA bill, but we do say we support constitutional protections and judicial oversight on any surveillance program involving Americans. We will review the current administration's warrantless wiretapping program. So that talks about an IG review that Senator Obama has talked about. And we reject illegal wiretapping of American citizens wherever they live. So again, it's forward-looking as opposed to
So
backward-looking.
it says he might renegotiate.
It's forward-looking.
Yes. Hey, no, we're done. Sorry. I can't do it, sir. I'm sorry. Right here, this gentleman.
Karen, David Aylward,
Yes, I know.
Emergency Response Alliance. First, wonderful job, beautiful writing, terrific politics, just kudos all around. We reward people for producing energy, but not for saving energy. In healthcare, you hit the cost issue. We don't reward people for keeping people well. We reward them for fixing them when they're sick. And then we have lots of strange incentives in the system because there isn't an overall view. How can you go after both of those issues? Or
Changing
more importantly,
incentives and energy.
Well, one of the things we talk about in the energy section is, and also in the infrastructure section, is smart energy grid. So that's part of it.
Smart energy grid.
Yeah, smart electricity grid. I'm sorry. And you know, part of what that is about is when people want to, if you have a solar panel on your house and you're generating more electricity than you can use, how does the system deal with that? So that, I think that's part of it. I think there's got to be a tremendous national effort on this whole topic, and I think that's part of what we've got to talk about.
Do you look beyond the auto sector? Like a lot of folks typically kind of focus on cafe standards, auto sector, there's this preponderant sort of large focus there. Or do you look at utilities? Do you look at the other major consumers and providers in a comprehensive way?
Yeah.
I asked that for Dave McCurdy. Yes, right back here. I apologize for anyone going so short. It's just we have a very few minutes before we have to finish up, and I want to get as many people on as I can.
Hi, Ben Allen with National Head Start Association. Want to thank the Senator for his support of Head Start and Early Head Start. I was wondering if you could elaborate on the vision that Senator Obama has for Head Start and Early Head Start.
Great.
These
Head
programs
Start.
are very much empowerment kinds of programs.
Exactly. Yeah, and that's been a big emphasis of his, has been on expanding, giving every child an opportunity to have quality early education, and that involves building on Head Start and Early Head Start and expanding those programs. And that's they're very much at the center of what he would do.
Carol Wayman with the Corporation for Enterprise Development. I know New America Foundation and others are supporting personal savings and strategies to increase personal savings for asset building. Can you talk about what's in the platform?
Yeah, we have a whole section on saving, actually, on purpose. We have a separate plank on saving, and mostly what that focuses on is the retirement account that Senator Obama has put forward, but also employer-based pensions, making sure that they're secure, and yeah, encouraging people to save. And it talks about the historically low saving rate that we have right now as a big problem.
Great. Did I miss anybody? In the very back. Our journalist from Japan. Go ahead.
Thank you for taking time to ask.
Don't worry about thanking.
Yeah,
just
okay.
ask the question.
Sorry. I don't want to ask how the Obama maybe administration want to talk with the financial market. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you for asking that. We do have a section in the economic stewardship that does talk to what's happened in our financial markets with disjointed and lax regulation over recent years. And so it lays out some principles that Senator Obama articulated when he spoke at Cooper Union in New York with Mayor Bloomberg. And it talks about the need for transparency. It the need for consistent rules for people who are going to be able to get a bailout to also be subject to regulations. So it lays out a philosophy on that.
Former Congressman McCurdy.
Karen, good job. As you said, the platforms are what you stand for, not the how to do it. And Maya had some tough questions about how you do it. Is there any reference, and I know Governor Warner is going to be a keynote,
Yeah.
and he's really highlighting kind of a post-partisan way of dealing with big problems. And he inherited some big problems. Whoever is president is going to inherit huge problems. How do you just discuss the priorities or the next steps to from what you stand for to actually how you're going to address problems?
That's a great, thank you so much for asking that. We actually talk in the preamble about how important it is to respect other people's point of view, and that we're a party of inclusion, and that we may not always agree, but we have to treat each other with respect and goodwill. And it specifically says there can't be any Republican or Democratic ideas. There have to be ideas that are smart and good for America and those that aren't. And that's, you know, that's something that I don't think we can have a policy for. I think that's just something that we have to remind ourselves of every day. And Senator Obama sets a great example on that. I mean, having worked for him, that is how he operates, absolutely.
Let me just pose one last question before we close. Recently, we had an interesting person here speaking, Tom Fingar. Tom is the chairman of the National Intelligence Council, sort of the CIA's think tank, if you will, the director of National Intelligence's think tank. And his comment was very interesting. He said, I asked him, how often do you get stuff right? And he says, probably about 85%. And he says, I think that number, and he says, I think that number's too high. It means we're not taking enough risks, we're not putting enough hard stuff on the table, that we're setting ourselves up for victory, for things we can achieve. How much of this do you think is hard-reaching? So that when you're 4 years from now, if Barack Obama were to win, do you think this is low-hanging fruit, or do you think it's really, really tough? What do you think your achievement rate is going to be? I mean, I know this is unfair, but it does ask the question of, since you put this together and you heard from so many voices, how hard is this going to be to do?
Oh, that's a really tough question. It's a tough set of questions, I think. This is how I'll choose to answer it. What I think this shows is, it wasn't a hard document to put together. Let me just put it that way. Democrats are so united, and there's such a strong sense of non-apology about this document. There's no sense that we have to, Susan was reading the Don't Ask, Don't Tell, going through the civil liberties. We're not apologetic about the fact that these are American values that we're restating here, and that these are very common sense solutions to problems. They might, some of these, some of the education policies might have seemed edgy 4 or 8 years ago. I think they're considered very common sense now. The healthcare, there's so much unity on 99% of the approach. So in that sense, it was very easy to put together. I think getting it done is the big challenge, and that's why I was stressing at the beginning why we needed to have those last 2 sections, because I think there's a fear that we can have all the ideas we want and all the unity we want. Obviously, it's going to be a lot helped if we have unity and if we get Democrats elected in larger margins. But to overcome this culture in Washington, that's really an issue. You know, what are we going to do to get people to cast off their cynicism and actually to put pressure on everybody in Washington and to stay involved and make sure that change actually happens? That's the big, question. And I think that if we can do that, and we tried to lay out some ways that we could do that, because we're very cognizant, that's actually the big issue. If we can do that, then I think the success rate will be very, very high.
I want to thank Karen and Susan Rice very much for this, to help us understand a little bit more of the Democratic Party playbook as they think about policy. It's very important. We're a policy-interested place. I very much hope that the Republican National Committee also comes and shares with us its playbook so we can sort of think through these issues. Susan Rice agreed to appear last night at midnight. We connected. Karen and I finally signed off this about 7 o'clock last night. Steve Cole was walking by my office and said, "You're available," and Maya McGinnis gave up a really, really awesome lunch today at 1789 Restaurant to be here. And all of you, particularly, I want to thank all of those who are watching in TV rooms and on the line and who were standing in the back. And it's just been great, because people recognize that it's very, very important to struggle with these issues. And it's great to have a portal with someone as capable and competent as Karen Kornblue to do that. Just really quick before we thank them, I want to thank, there's so many people at New America Thank, but Sam Sheridan, Liz Wu, Mike Jones, Brian Till, Aaron Dankowski, and Patrick Doherty. They worked all night to make this happen. So thank you. Thank you very much.